Are we live? Is it happening? Is this real life? I think it is. Fantastic. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Common Ground Conference. Firstly, we'd just like to start off by saying thank you to everyone for attending, and thank you to those of you who have been sharing the event and spreading the word as well. It's been insane the amount of people who have responded to this, so thank you so much. So if you aren't already acquainted with what myself and Rachel do, we're two hospitality workers who run Burum Collective, which is an online network and kind of like community blog with the aim of improving the drinks industry and supporting first-time or early writers and acting as a platform for those whose voices should be amplified across beer, wine, and cider. Myself and Rachel both left our previous careers in theatre and events in 2017. We then moved into the drinks industry through hospitality work. We started off there more kind of, studying at college, and then just ended up staying and, falling in love with it. And we've been working in the drinks industry now for about 4 years. It's not been super easy, but it's an industry that we both care about very, very deeply. And I guess I'm letting you know that because I want you to know that when we criticize the industry, it's not because we hate it. We really, really want the industry to succeed, and we want it to be more sustainable and a safer space for the people within it. So, and the reason that we called the meeting today is because there is a serious problem with the way that staff are treated across the drinks industry in the UK. Unfortunately, our industry is built on low pay and little to no workers' rights and some bullying and a distinct lack of unionisation as well. So, I mean, bringing everyone together like this is something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and I know it's something that Rachel's wanted to do as well. I feel like our industry, particularly craft beer, has come so far through the work of individuals and small group efforts, but that needs to stop because people can't carry the weight alone, and it needs to be a collaborative effort with the help of pre-existing structures to make sure that no one gets burnt out. So that's kind of what we're proposing today and why we've invited everybody that we have. Yeah, Rachel, can you go through some house rules quickly? Thank you.
Yes, I can. Hi, hello everybody. Thank you so much for coming. There are so many of you. Yes, so very quickly, I'll just run through a couple of house rules. We trust you all implicitly, of course, but just so you all know, rules of conduct for this evening. We want this to be as informative as possible. And it's only useful for the people that need it most if they feel safe and comfortable to be here. So we're just going to ask you to keep your language as trigger-free as possible. There's a lot of sensitive issues that are being discussed. But yeah, like I said, it's only useful for those who need it if they feel comfortable being here. And that won't happen if triggering language is used in excess. We also ask that we encourage you all to talk in the chat. That would be lovely. It'd be nice to see lots of your names and engagement. We do ask, though, that everyone refrains from naming both people and places. Neither myself nor Helen are in the position financially, occupationally, or personally to be dealing with anything legally at the moment. And yeah, and this is being recorded. So to keep everyone in attendance as safe as possible, this is not the space to be naming people or places, and we ask that you respect that. Thank you very much. We also ask that before people speak, you just take a minute to pause and about whether what you're about to say is for yourself or for the sake of the room. What else? Yes, me and Helen are full-time hospitality workers, which is part of the reason that this is so important to us. But it also means we are very, very busy. And we've been doing this in our spare time. And we've been, Helen has put in a hell of a lot more work than I have. And everything they've done has just been amazing. But we are not going to be able to tackle every single issue over the course of this evening. This is not an evening that's going to solve a problem. It's just going to start the conversations. So we hope that you engage with tonight and all the discussions moving forward with constructive kindness to both us and to all the really wonderful people that we have speaking that have given up their time this evening as well. And for everyone that's given up their Monday evening to attend too. That'd be fantastic. We hope you will have lots of questions for us and for the people that we have talking. There are, as I said, there are a lot of you, which is absolutely fantastic. It just means that we might not be able to get to everyone, but please don't take it personally. We'll try and get as many done as we can. If you do have questions, if you could, just put them in the Q&A section. You'll see chat, polls, and then Q&A. If you could put them in the Q&A section, that means that we'll be able to sift through them a lot easier than kind of looking through the chat. That would be great, and it just means we'll be able to get to them hopefully quicker. I think that's it. So yeah, thank you in advance, and yeah, really looking forward to having these conversations today. Before we continue, we did a form when we invited you all to kind of tell us the things that you wanted discussed tonight and in the future. There were some really insightful comments and really wonderful perspectives. Again, we've tried to include as many of them as possible, but we are not going to be able to include everything in today. So apologies in advance, but that doesn't mean we're not going to get around to them in the future. What we thought, though, it would be useful to just share some of the common themes that were brought up. Like Helen said, this needs as many people acting on this as possible. We've got a lot of brilliant people involved, but we're going to need a lot more doing different things. So we just thought we'd share some of the wants and the needs of people in the industry. So for the conversations and hopefully actual tangible actions that are going to come out of this, you can all start to get about an idea of what is lacking and what is needed. So I'm just going to do a little quick run through, if I can read my handwriting, of most of the things that were discussed. Unionization was the main one, which we are going to be discussing at length today. Next was safe and supported structures for reporting and dealing with instances of harassment and discrimination. This includes company policies, both how to put them in place and wanting to hear from companies that already have them in place as well. What alternatives employees have when they work for a business that has no HR. A lot of hospitality businesses are very small. It also means the lines blurred between personal and professional is a really tricky one. So kind of best practice on how to report. A lot of people requested some form of independent reporting body, which could be unions, which could not be unions. That's something I think to think about and discuss and maybe work towards. With unions, a thorough look at pros and cons, just so we can start to be aware of what reservations people may have about them, so they can be addressed, as well as the things that are good about them too. How to enact accountability of those that have done harm, and then how to support those that have experienced harm in terms of structures and frameworks and resources for all of the above. How to ensure better working standards to protect both the physical and mental well-being of staff. How to educate consumers who want their purchasing choices to be more informed. Best practices in incident reporting. Best practices for employers as well, in how to support their employees and how to best deal with complaints when they do happen. Just turn my page. Ensuring that all of these industry discussions that we're having begin to be a little bit more broader and start to reach outside spaces and not the same circles that they keep on happening. I think that at the moment, most discussions include owners, managers, founders, and people with larger platforms, but it's the vast majority of workers who maybe don't have thousands of people following their Twitter or have access to those people who maybe need the help and support the most. So it's how we get this information and these discussions further out there. Me and Helen have an idea for that, which we'll discuss at the end. Again, how do we include customers and those outside of the industry into these discussions as well? The lack of correlation between the respect of the product in terms of crafts and then the respect of the people in terms of the minimum wage they are paid to make that product. How we apply these conversations to festival spaces and larger events. And how to communicate the need for change to male-heavy management, which I think is, from personal experience, very tricky. Low wages and unpaid overtime. What do employers wish to see from their employees in regards to contracts, and how can these policies be included in employment contracts? Again, more information on contractual law and employee rights. Getting home safe. This is an industry with a lot of late finishes. Tackling of microaggressions and how they lead to harmful working environments. How we move from anonymous allegations to practical applications of ensuring that these things no longer continue. A compiled list of resources of all of the above. Discussions whether unionization, I'm really struggling with that word today, is meant to safeguard everyone. And in the conversations that happen, how do we make sure there's actual tangible action alongside buzzwords and phrases such as everyone is safe, people are welcome, you're fully supported, etc., etc. What does that mean? What does that look like? So that's basically, out of the 200 people that responded, a lot of the kind of main themes. Like I said, some we'll discuss today, some we won't be able to, but some that we hope that we will continue to, and we will see other people starting to as well. So yeah, thank you for listening to that. Back to you, Helen.
Thank you so much, Rachel. So as some of you may or may not know, one of the catalysts for bringing everyone together for this meeting has been the recent Me Too movement within the beer industry in the US and the UK. Women, men, and non-binary folk have been sharing their stories of sexual harassment and abuse of workers' rights through anonymous Instagram submissions. The first few submissions that came in were into Bryan Allen's Instagram account. They were mostly US-based breweries, but as time went on, more and more UK breweries started to get named. This isn't just an issue within breweries. Discrimination and harassment is rife amongst the drinks industry, from making to hospitality. I think to some people, these stories are a shock and surprising, but unfortunately to a lot of women and non-binary people in the industry, these things are relatively well known, and they've each got their own stories. Whether that's been shared amongst quiet conversation, mostly due to fear, or as we've been finding out recently, NDAs, or simply, perhaps their HR department have been complicit in not pursuing complaints. So once more UK stories started to come out on Bryan's account, Siobhan, who's here today, picked up the mantle and offered her own account for anonymous UK submissions. So Siobhan, if you'd like to tell us, thank you for starters, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me on.
Okay. What has that experience been like for you?
Oh, that's a bit of a loaded question. It has been, so as you said, but I decided to just bite the bullet and start collating all these stories from the UK point of view, because I've worked in the beer industry for 3.5 years. I've worked for breweries, I've worked in bars, etc., and I'm now a freelance writer, and I've experienced my own deal of sexism, sexual harassment, and all of that kind of thing. And I thought, you know what, like, I'm not directly affiliated with any brewery, I'm not affiliated with any company, I'm just a freelance person with somewhat of a presence online, and I thought it'd be quite good for me to offer up that safe space, because I've got my own stories. I'll share mine, and then hopefully people can feel comfortable sharing with me. And I expected a few stories. I'd seen a few stories on Brienne's Instagram from UK-based people. I submitted my own story to her, but it has been a bit of a tidal wave of stories coming my way, and a lot of it has been not surprising at all, because, like I said, I've experienced these things myself, and I've heard other people's stories. I was part of a panel for Women on Tap festival a couple of years ago on sexual harassment, and Nicola Bottomley did a survey, and it is a lot more prevalent than you would think, but also in some ways it has been incredibly heartbreaking and shocking, some of the allegations that have been brought up, and just how easily some people's experiences have been brushed under the carpet, so to speak. And a lot of people have been asking me, like, from who work at companies, what can I do? We don't have a huge team. How can I take this on? Blah blah blah. And so I'm really glad to be part of this conference today, because my plan the whole time wasn't to just open up my DMs, share stories, the end. Like, I want to compile some kind of document that I can share with people when they ask me, who's doing it right? What can I do? I'm starting up a tap room. I'm starting up a brewery. I'm one of the I've had people say I'm one of the mentioned breweries, and it's just really made me check my own behaviors and check my, like, what's going on in my workplace that has allowed this to happen. And I want to be able to offer those resources. So I'm really grateful that you guys have invited me to be here. And I feel like I've waffled on for several minutes now, and I don't think I've even answered your question.
No, that was fantastic. And I mean, I'm also not surprised, because I can't imagine it's quite a lonely thing to have taken on in that respect. And obviously it's just, you doing this. One of the things I would like to also just bring up for everybody is that there is currently, if you go to the Burum Twitter page, there is currently, you'll find the GoFundMe link, which is for Siobhan for some legal fees, which would be very helpful. Thank you if anyone has any nice money.
Can I just say, I know a lot of you in the chat have been in touch with me today and in the past about a GoFundMe, and I started it like maybe 3 hours ago, and it has already completely snowballed, and I'm so grateful. I was saying to Helen about half an hour before we got together for this, I hope I stop crying, because I'm just so, like, incredibly overwhelmed by the support. Like, it has been a very lonely, mentally exhausting task that I've taken on over the last couple of weeks, but it has not been thankless. And I've had so much support from people, from breweries, from people who work at beer companies, from people who, like, just generally work in the industry, offering support and advice and help. And it has just been so heartwarming to know that I've got that support as well. And it is a bit more difficult in the UK than it is in the US to fight kind of defamation claims and stuff like that. But to know that I've got that support there from friends and from random strangers it's just so wonderful. And like I said, Helen and Rachel allowed me to write an article for Burum Collective last week, I think it was, that I wrote it, and part of that was me saying that I love this industry, like, as much as it may come across, and some people may think that I'm going on some kind of witch hunt and all of this. It's not. It's because I love the industry so much, and I want to see change happen. And like, it's just, yeah, it's great that, like, there's so many of us working to make the change happen, instead of just calling out people or posting stories on social media and then just keeping quiet. Like, I hope it has the same effect on the industry that Brianne's work has had. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, and thank you for everything that you've done. It's it's been incredibly
well.
Oh, it's fine. Amazing. Thank you so much. So we were going to split this meeting into two originally, but we've decided to instead bring everybody together. So if you could just bear with us one moment while we bring the rest of the speakers now into the stage space. So we've also got Lorraine Copes joining us, and also Robbie Judkins as well. So you'll just need to bear with me whilst I figure out some technical things. So, okay, Rachel and Siobhan, you guys need to drop out, I think, to let everyone else in. I'm sorry. Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Okay, here's Robbie. Yeah, there we are.
Hi.
Hello, everybody. Sorry,
Hello.
we realized about a minute before we opened this meeting that you could only have 5 people at a time on, and I was like, oh, rats. This is now our section with some speakers. Our first speaker today is Lorraine Copes from Be Inclusive Hospitality. So, I mean, first off, could you explain for people what Be Inclusive is and how it came about?
Yeah, sure. So Be Inclusive Hospitality is a social enterprise and a not-for-profit with a mission to accelerate race equality. And I'll describe us in two halves. The first is that we're a community network. So we're the only professional network within the UK made up of Black, Asian and ethnic minorities across all career levels throughout the UK and further afield, actually. And the second half of the business is a service provider. So we deliver diversity and inclusion consultancy across the sector. So that's hospitality, hotels, pubs. We also host a series of events where we host events ultimately because in the main, and I'll tell you a bit about myself to give you context in a moment, but in the main, there are not Black and Asian people generally on panels or in events. So we've created some, or we've started to create some. And then the third and final part of our business, which is the most important, is centered in learning and development. So we launched a mentorship scheme earlier this year, and we have a mentorship circle going live later this year. And just to give you broader context about me personally, I've worked in hospitality for 20 years, never within the operation itself. I know I look very young, but I started very young. Never within the hospitality sector itself in the operation, but my background and discipline is procurement. So I've led procurement teams for brands like the Gordon Ramsay Group, Corbett & King, Shake Shack, TGI Fridays, pub sector, contract catering. So there really isn't a pocket of hospitality that I haven't worked. And the consistent theme throughout my 20-year career has been, generally, if you are Black or Asian, you occupy the lowest paying roles in really junior positions. And throughout my time, especially as an exec or a director over the past 7 or 8 years, there's never anyone that looks like me within a decision-making room, even though the group that I'm referring to represents 17% of the sector, which is symptomatic of a wider problem, which is why I founded the business.
Amazing. And it's interesting then you just talked about some percentages. I was going to say you've just released the Inside Hospitality Report, which I had a chance to look at the other day. And it's a really great insight. Even just looking at, like, I guess the hospitality industry as a whole, but also looking at obviously the possible barriers related to the current lack of representation within the industry. I mean, was there anything in the report that surprised you, or is there anything you kind of want to highlight from that?
Sure. Nothing surprised me. And I say that because the reality of is, when you're a Black British person that lives in the UK, you witness and see a lot, whether that is at work, in day-to-day life. So unfortunately, there are no surprises. What the report does is really reaffirm what I suspected to be the case with stats and numbers, and surveying almost 400 professionals throughout the sector. And some of the key headlines from that report is that over half of all ethnic minorities, broken down by groups, have experienced or witnessed racism within the place of work. And then specifically around concern around racism and discrimination, again, it's pretty high across the board. Something that was interesting, because we did survey people of all ethnicities, is that there is an appetite for education and learning around race literacy. And from the top of my head, I think only about 23% of those surveyed have had any education or learning on job around race and ethnicity. So all in all, the report really highlights how much work there is to be done. But what we also do is outline 8 key steps that we advise that businesses take towards driving change within their organizations.
Yeah. How do people go about accessing the report?
Yep. So on our website, which is www.bihospitality.co.uk, we have a section under Work With Us called Research and Insights, and we've got a couple of free downloads on there. The first is a report that was commissioned on our behalf by a think tank, which analyses data from the Labour ONS, and that again highlights disparities by ethnicity, such as pay gaps and length of time spent within employment. There's a summary report that's free of charge to download, and then the actual report itself is £299, and it's a 30-page, really comprehensive report. So yeah, you can find that on our website.
I think the thing that I couldn't just sort of across that survey that I couldn't quite get. I mean, again, it's that thing of like, it's something that I've always suspected, but hadn't quite. It was nice, almost nice to see it written down, but not really. Is the fact that pretty much, I think it's like 67% of hospitality staff are either paid real living wage or below, and then 23%, so the rest were paid minimum wage or below. Like, there is no one.
You know what? And what I will say is this, obviously my business is founded on the basis of race equality, but really broadly, the hospitality sector has a real problem around pay, fair pay, around culture, all of the things you described earlier. That's really an industry-wide problem. But what our study suggests and confirms is that if you are of colour, your experience is even worse than others. And those that are in this sector haven't got the greatest experience or aren't having the best experiences anyway.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work to do. There really is.
Yeah, 100%. What would you like to see from the rest of the industry moving forward?
I would like to see action taken, quite simply. No one should have to come to work and experience racism in the workplace. But really importantly, when we talk about equity and equality, we're talking about talent here. And why would you want to ostracize a proportion of the workforce that can help to drive change, profitability, and all that good stuff within your organization? And it really is around talent. So it's just one of the other reasons why I founded the business. I felt compelled, because if you look at every other sector, you look at the media, you look at, even sports, you look at public health, there's an acknowledgement and there's discussion about there being a problem. In the hospitality sector, there has never been and never is. And even up to last June, when George Floyd was murdered, it was tumbleweed in all of the trade press, which is a disgrace, because they also play a huge part in the problem that we have in terms of representation of people of colour fairly within the sector. So there's a lot of work to do, and it's not just hospitality, it's all the service sectors that support hospitality, because they reinforce the problems across the board, and that is whether race or gender.
Yeah, 100%. And I do find that this is something that, like, when we are talking about the problems within hospitality, like, it's something that I do find that is often left behind, and something that people don't necessarily talk about. And I, like, me and Rachel really want to make sure that the issues that marginalized people that are struggling with are like centered, because there needs to be, it's everyone needs to have a better experience within the drinks industry. And yeah, and I think it is interesting, everyone is having, like, it's a weird one, you're like, well, we're all having a bad time too, so, but it's like, well, let's all have a good time.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think, you know what, I think because the nature of hospitality is it's hospitable, and you see a lot of the front end fun side, you know, drinking, eating, beautiful environments, and you know, a lot of that's been glamorized with on television as well. So the hospitality sector is often seen as a sexy sector to either work within or to be an expert in beer or wine. But in shining such a powerful light on all of those things, for whatever reason, the problems that exist within the sector are just completely, you know, left behind, not mentioned, never discussed. And, you know, I firmly believe that anything that you can't talk about will never be fixed, quite simply.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. So I'm going to move on to Charlotte now, but if anyone has any questions for Lorraine, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A section below. Okay, so the next person I'm speaking to is Charlotte Cook. Hi, Charlotte.
Hello.
Hello.
Hiya.
So how long have you worked within the beer industry?
Just about 10 years now. So I've kind of been at great big multinational breweries and also kind of teeny weeny little in the shed and industrial estate breweries. And a lot of them have the same issues, just on different scales. So.
Okay. So what are the current issues within brewing?
I think that a lot of it's to do with working conditions, both mental and physical. So you'll be doing a lot of heavy lifting. Quite often people won't even be trained in how to heavy lift. Dealing with chemicals, the amount of times I've walked around a brewery seeing people not wearing safety glasses, maybe just because they don't know, or even they haven't been provided with them. Cold environments, really absolutely boiling hot environments where things can overboil and kill you. And there's basically, I think I've only worked in one single brewery where during kind of onboarding, I was given health and safety training, and that's out of 7, perhaps.
Wow.
Which is pretty damning.
Yeah.
Wow. I would say. And also the mental toll as well. You're often working really long hours, quite often in, again, these inhospitable environments. 12-hour shifts are not uncommon, lots and lots of night shift, which, as we all know, isn't particularly good for you. But with absolutely no kind of this is completely driven by the desire to increase profitability and output from the brewery, but there's absolutely and utterly no consideration and no support given to members of staff who then have to work these really difficult shifts without any kind of no counselling, no sleep therapy, nothing like that, all of which can easily be provided by the employers. They just choose not to.
So, I mean, what would you like to see improve for the brewing industry as a whole?
First of all, I'd like to see pay improve. Pay has been quite stagnant. From when I started brewing until now, I would say that an assistant brewer is probably getting paid pretty much the same thing, which is either living wage or minimum wage, which quite frankly isn't good enough, especially because these are people who are entering an industry and with the intention of learning and developing within that industry. And if you just kind of, you stick them on a keg washer or minimum wage and expect them to, somehow manage to maintain the momentum and magic that this is actually such a wonderful industry and this is definitely where I want to commit all of my time, and then wonder why they don't put in the effort, then I think that's just quite simply poor management. No unpaid overtime as well. The amount of unpaid overtime that I've done, I could have, definitely increased my house deposit on. There's really poor contracting. There's also not very clear definition between contracts and handbooks and what is actually disciplinable under the contract and under the handbook, mostly because they're written by people with absolutely and utterly no legal or HR experience, and they just copy and paste them from the internet or get it from a firm who have no kind of real understanding of what the industry is, and put in clauses, etc. That, you know, then that leads to people feeling like they don't have a recourse if they feel like, oh, well, you know, it says this in my handbook, and they don't really know what to do about it. And alongside that, I'd also like to see a massive improvement in human resources within breweries. Again, it's a new industry. It's come out in the past 15 years or so. And if anyone's read my Beer 52 article that I wrote last week, highlighting how there are frequently either no HR departments or the HR department are actually untrained, you know, maybe sent on a half-day course or a day course, which quite frankly isn't good enough, and also leaves the brewery really open to troubles further down the line. And yes, so that's something that I'd like to see to be, like, you know, it to be standard that there is either an HR department or an external HR department that people have recourse to, not just a brewery owner who might just tell you to stop worrying so much and that it's no big deal, and if you don't like it, then off you trot, which does happen and would not be thing. So yeah, I think, like, you know, genuine accountability and organization. So a lot of breweries are really, really small. So for example, in my current brewery, I am the only non-director, so the only employee, and I just make the beer. They're really great guys, really, really supportive, very happy that I'm doing all of this. But I certainly wouldn't have felt safe to do this in previous jobs. I would have actually feared for my current employment and also repercussions that the employers would have been interested in pursuing, because there are powerful people out there. So what I'd like to see is, again, it's unionization. So even if you are the single employee, if there's 3 of you in the brewery, along with the owner or whatever, then somewhere that you can join, somewhere that you can have some support, something to talk to, something to get backup from, that you maybe just don't have that knowledge, you maybe don't even have that confidence. But it's incredible what can happen if somebody just holds your hand going into something. And even though, you know, we're all big boys and girls, sometimes we just need a little bit of hand holding as well. So, yeah, and also adverts as well for breweries. So the amount of times that you see a brewery advert where it says you have to lift 50 kilos or pay on application, you don't know if that's going to be £19,000 or £39,000. So what's the point in putting in your application if it's just going to be a massive waste of time? So
yeah, I think the lack of formality within job applications generally across the drinks industry is a bit of a problem with you know, sometimes jobs just not even being advertised. It's there's a real, I think, informality to this industry that we do keep seeing. Thank you so much for talking through all of that. Obviously, I don't work at a brewery, so that was really informative. And obviously, we invited you like here because of the fact that, you know, you'd posted on Twitter that you wanted to start talking about what can happen next for the brewing industry. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of that with us. That was really important. Also, your shirt is fantastic. Okay, awesome. Right, so the next person I'm going to speak to is Bryan. Hello, Bryan.
Hi, everyone.
How are you?
I'm okay. I'm good. I just want to say this is like such a phenomenal event. I can't believe how many people are on it and the broad range of speakers. It's really quite exciting to see brewery and drinks workers coming together like this. So thanks for having me.
That's okay. Thank you for coming along. So you're from Unite, which for anyone who doesn't know is a union. Can you explain more, please?
Yeah, I mean, Unite, obviously it's not always about the size of the organisation, but Unite is the largest union, not only in the UK, it's one of the largest in Europe. And the reason I say that is because of the might of an organisation, not always, but when you're dealing with employers in this industry who just think they're above the law in some cases, I think it's important to have the support of a union and a collective, as Charlotte and others have pointed out, whether it's 3 or 4 people or 300 people. So Unite is the largest union, certainly in the private sector, and we've got members across every area of the economy that you can think of. So every job role that you can think of that obviously isn't a nurse or a teacher, we will represent members in that sector. But I wanted to focus, Helen, if I could, on Unite Hospitality, because we are the only union that's got a bespoke organising focus specifically on bar, restaurant, club workers, cafe workers, anyone who you can club. We've even got a casino branch as well. So anywhere that there is alcohol, and as you can hear from my Glasgow accent, that basically means everywhere where alcohol is sold. We've been on prohibition over the last 9 months. As you probably know, we've been on the longest lockdown. So the last 9 months has been pretty insane in terms of job losses, in terms of the sheer audacity of some employers. I'm going to focus on some of the positives as well, Helen, and what we've managed to win. But I'll just, I should say that the central focus before the pandemic for Unite Hospitality was on the Fair Hospitality Charter, which is basically 10 demands that our members put together, 10 reforms that are needed within the sector to transform it for the benefit of the workers within it. They're not radical demands, but they would radically transform the sector. So, for example, guaranteed hours, but with a cap on the amount of hours that you actually do. So that means no more 0 hours contracts, obviously. We cannot have a situation where the industry is completely founded unsustainably on people not knowing 1 week to the next how many hours they're going to have, what their wage is going to be. As Charlotte and others have said, a real living wage. So for us, that means between 10 and 15 pounds an hour. We need to stop mucking about with fake living wages or whatever the Tories, sorry to be political, but whatever the Tories want to name it next. Giving someone £6.30 an hour because they're 19 is not acceptable. If you're 19, you've got you could have a mortgage, you could have kids, you could have bills to pay. Why should you earn 40% less than someone who might be less experienced? We've represented 26-year-old bar workers who come in off the street, having never pulled a pint. They're getting paid 40% more than the 19-year-old manager or the 19-year-old brewery worker who's been there since they were 16. Like, how can that be fair in this sector? So one of the main demands we've got is to bring in a minimum but livable wage across the board. Obviously equal pay for young workers and for all workers, but specifically no differentiation in pay for young workers. We want to see a proactive anti-sexual harassment policy. So what we mean by that is we want to bring back third-party reporting. So a lot of people will have experienced sexual harassment firsthand and just how insidious it is, from verbal references all the way right up to sexual assault, which obviously I'm not going to go into, but that is what our members face and workers across this industry face. Employers are not doing what they should be doing to protect those workers. There used to be a requirement within the Equality Act that employers were effectively held liable for customers' sexual harassment of workers. That was removed by the Conservative government. So it's no longer a legal liability. We want to bring that back. We're lobbying on a political level, a legal level, but also an industrial level to make sure that workers are demanding that at the workplace all the way up to Westminster. But Helen, that's the foundation of the campaign, is the Fair Hospitality Charter. Among other things, 100% tips, making sure people aren't screwed over by trunk systems that end up getting 40% of what they actually earned. So I'll just leave it there on what is Unite Hospitality and what we're doing. I know that's convoluted, Helen, but basically it's a big campaign. But we've been going for about 4 years, and yeah, we've got quite a few thousand members now, so it's doing well.
And is your work currently based quite heavily in Scotland as well, or have you got other kind of areas across the UK that you're also working in?
So I'm the organiser for Scotland, so that's why I'm going to be quite Scotland specific, but we're UK wide. So we've got our biggest branches are in London, but then our second biggest branches is in Glasgow, and then Edinburgh, and then Cardiff, and then Liverpool, and then Manchester. We've got a huge branch in Belfast. So over the last 4 years, we've grown in those kind of hubs. But yeah, we've got good membership. I mean, we've won campaigns in the last year from Shetland to Portsmouth. So we are UK wide, and as I say, we've got that, UK wide legal and industrial support mechanism in place for bar workers as well.
Mm-hmm. So how does it work? Like, if I wanted to join Unite, like why would I join Unite, I guess?
Well, I mean, apart from we are the specific campaign, I know there's other unions out there, and I'm not against anyone joining any union, frankly. I'm someone who thinks you should just join the union that's relevant to your workplace. But if you work in a bar, a restaurant, a hotel, or a cafe, or a club, or a casino, then you'll have a specific campaign all ready for you to take part in, to help influence, to add to the Fair Hospitality Charter, to campaign for. But we're also a winning union. We've won campaigns even before the pandemic. One of the biggest independent arts venues, events venues in Europe, with over 200 workers, signed up to the charter in 2018. That means that they get a real living wage. They have a really solid, proactive anti-sexual harassment policy. 100% of their tips goes to the workers, and they now have a really solid group of an organising committee, effectively. That, the employer, I'm going to obviously keep them nameless, but they are not perfect. They will make mistakes. There is issues and there's grievances that arise. Just because they recognise the union doesn't mean they're perfect. And the organising committee that's there of Unite members consistently holds that management to account. So that's the benefit, not just of joining Unite, of joining any union, is that you will be part of not only a ready-made campaign where you get the legal support. And Charlotte was talking earlier about holding your hand, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Like, people initially contact Unite because they want to know what their rights are. What we do, though, is we obviously let them know what their rights are, but we also let them know how to enforce them and how to put them into practice. And the answer every single time is collective force. If there's just one of you, you could have the best legal arguments in the world, and you probably won't succeed. If you get your colleagues together, and it doesn't need to be going straight to strike action, you can be putting internal grievances and pressure on through social media and stuff like that. But that's how we've won in the past. One of the biggest breweries in Glasgow were not being very supportive of the workers. They tried to terminate 12 of our leading members at the brewery. We got together not only with the 12 workers that were being terminated, but with the other 40 who originally didn't want to join the union, but when they went for their colleagues, decided to join the union, and we now have 90% density. So what that employers ended up doing is forcing that vacillating middle of people who might not have known about the union or the benefits of joining, got behind their colleagues, and now not only have they been reinstated, but they got 100% furlough. So they forced the employer to put them on furlough instead of terminating them, and they're being paid 100% wages, which is a huge win in an industry that's very unheard of.
Yeah, 100%. And I found that interesting. I read a while ago that there's a report of like people within the drinks industry and how like from the 90s there was, a certain amount of people, I can't remember all the numbers, but basically it dropped drastically throughout, like from the 90s to like the mid 2000s. It's kind of drastically dropped. And I think that it's not, it's not something that necessarily everybody knows about. Do you think, you just mentioned social media, I mean, do you think social media is a positive tool to kind of talk about unionization, or is is it a danger to people's jobs? Because I mean, people are pretty nervous to start talking about things like this.
Yeah. Firstly, social media is instrumental to organising hospitality workers. Firstly, and again, I don't want to focus on the negative, but most employers don't want, in the industry anyway, most employers don't want their workers to be talking about unionisation in the workplace. So sometimes you have to do that through social media. Now, a lot of employers have gotten wise to this, and they've created, wide-ranging, very vague social media policies that effectively, prevent you from doing this, and possible disciplinary action or even being sacked. If you're disciplined or sacked as a direct consequence of trying to organise a union, that in and of itself is unlawful. So if you set up a WhatsApp group, obviously I'm not talking about public Twitter pages where you're attacking your employer, that's going to get you into trouble. But if you set up a WhatsApp group with your colleagues with the sole intention of joining and creating a union, and you were detrimentally treated as a direct consequence of that, that is automatically unfair. So you can challenge that legally and also collectively. But just on social media in general, when we started the campaign in 2017, we done a big deep dive research into just how ununionised the industry was. And at that point, 4% of the sector. And I'm not just talking about drinks, I'm talking about, the widest possible understanding of 4 or 5 million people who work in hospitality and services. 4% of them were in any union at all. So that includes all unions, including Unite. It's now in the region of 10%. So whatever Robbie and myself and others are doing, it's working. We're growing in terms of that. What social media, the really instrumental part that social media plays is that it's a great communication method, because workers contact us and they report bad incidents or good incidents where their employer signed up. So for example, someone who worked in a hotel up in Perth contacted us and said, just to let you know, my employer's just started paying us the living wage. And I was a bit like, why? Immediately cautious, like what's going on? But it turns out they'd seen the Fair Hospitality Charter, and the guy who's now the managing director wanted to set a precedent. Obviously, they do it for their own purposes. They want to stand out. They want to be an independent hotel that treats their staff properly. But they've now signed up to the full Fair Hospitality Charter. But we also find out about really insidious things that are happening across the industry. So recently, a chain that shall remain nameless, a restaurant chain, had decided to sack its head chef, who was one of our members, because he had the audacity to ask for his overtime to be paid. They sacked him the day after he asked for about 230 hours of overtime to be paid. And he was contractually entitled to this. So he was on, a relatively low salary, doing 70 hours a week, as everyone here knows what that feels like. He asked for his overtime to be paid, and then the next day he was terminated. So that was obviously unfair. Automatically unfair legally. The company refused to even engage with us, refused to respond to any of our emails, refused to respond to the workers' emails. Not only did that turn the whole kitchen against the restaurant, they all joined the union. It meant that we had to go to social media. We put one Instagram post out, and because of the popularity of this restaurant, it had over 250,000 hits in 48 hours. Obviously, by the Monday morning, the managing director of the company contacted us and said he'd missed the emails. They'd gone into the spam folder, and he was willing to speak to us. And the money was in the chef's account by close of business that day. But we're still taking him to court because he's been sacked for asking for his overtime. So yeah, that's just one example, Helen. I know I'm rattling on, but social media is instrumental in an industry where, until we reach a flashpoint, I know that Robbie knows exactly what I'm talking about, until we reach a flashpoint of organising where we have sufficient density to actually internally put pressure on employers to do the right thing, social media is always going to be important for helping us do that. Yeah,
fantastic. Thank you so much for answering that. there's a couple of people who have asked about how it works for people who are freelance. Is Unite a union for people who are freelance as well?
Yep. So we represent, I'm not comparing it obviously, but we represent taxi drivers, we represent self-employed courier drivers, we represent bogus self-employed courier drivers, but we also represent freelance workers across the economy. So whether they be in breweries or hospitality, or be freelance writers, we represent them. I should say and give a shout out to the NUJ and BEC2 and other unions out there that do specifically represent journalistic trades, but Unite does represent most freelancers within the private sector.
Okay, fantastic. Just my last question for you is, so there have been a couple of discussions, especially amongst kind of more of the brewery sector, about specific codes of practices for businesses. Are these the kinds of things that can be drawn up with unions, like with the help of unions? Is that something that can kind of I guess in a similar way to the charter, except more with stuff that is brewery specific? Is that a possibility? Because obviously they need to be drawn up with an external body. It's just, I guess, people are trying to work out where they can take that, where there isn't an already with someone who doesn't have a vested interest with breweries.
Yeah. So what we done, just to give a specific brewery example, what we done with that brewery that was not playing ball at the start, as I said, we reached a point where the employer had to effectively negotiate with the union. We got them to sign up to the Fair Hospitality Charter, but with some tweaks specific to breweries. So, some of the stuff that Charlotte was talking about making sure that recruitment adverts are not inherently sexist or inherently discriminatory or indirectly discriminatory in terms of not even telling you what the work-life balance policies are, or the what your wage is at the start. So we got them to put in place a really solid recruitment process and policy. But we also, this brewery, it's not perfect at all, but what it has in place in the back of house and front of house is honestly one of the most solid general harassment policies that I've ever seen and we've ever negotiated. And it was from workers demanding it from an employer who, as I said, would not play ball at the start. But I think maybe what you're referring to, Helen, in terms of like a legally binding agreement, is a collective bargaining agreement. So when any union reaches 50% of the workforce, they can have a compulsory recognition agreement, which effectively means that the employer is obliged to sign up to a collective bargaining agreement, which, the union, the workers themselves can define that agreement. They can write down what that is, but at the very minimum, it would have, the right to monthly meetings for staff that's paid, the right to training on everything from we do consent training. So under the sexual harassment side of things, we do consent training, obviously for almost entirely for male members, but we get the employer to pay for that where there is a collective bargaining agreement in place. I'm not going to lie to you, we've only got a few dozen across the country. Employers do not want to sign up to them, obviously, voluntarily. So we reach a point of density of the membership. So if there's workers on here who are in a brewery and there's 20 workers in the brewery, all you need is 11 of those workers to join the union, and you've already got grounds for a collective bargaining agreement.
Wow.
And as I say, I can't go into specifics because you can define what that is. I've never worked in a brewery. You guys know exactly what is needed to change the sector. So you can effectively write that using the charter as like the bones, the skeleton of the framework.
Amazing. Thank you so much for talking with me, Bryan. That was really, really helpful. Fab. So our last speaker is Robbie from the IWW. So let's kick off, Robbie, with if you could just explain what the IWW is.
Sure. Yeah, I just also want to say I've heard and learned some great things so far, so I'm really thankful for everything that everyone's shared. I think we've got a lot in common in terms of what we want and where we want to be. The IWW is the Industrial Workers of the World. It's been around since 1905. Started off in America, but it's obviously spread globally. We are a union that's led by its members. Through direct democracy and through often direct action as well. We support workers across the industries. So even though we're called the industrial workers, that can mean any worker essentially. And we've got a long history, and I'm a part of the London IWW branch, but there are branches up and down the country. And we have a long preamble about our history and where we stand for, but we support workers in situations where they need help and support and need to gain the power to get what they're owed, or to have more control in their workplace, to make sure that they're not harassed or discriminated against. And I think, much like Bryan was saying earlier, that if a union exists in your workplace, then speak to them, get in contact with them. The reason I got involved with the IWW was because a friend recommended me to do that, and that was the kind of the route in. But there are a lot of us now joining and speaking up about a lot of these issues. We do help workers in breweries, and that's kind of my experience from working in a brewery and getting involved in the union, but we also support hospitality workers as well. I guess one of the slight differences is that we don't offer support to bosses, or anyone has the ability to hire or fire, as we feel that the differences in what the workers want and what the managers want are often at odds with each other. So that's just a rule that we have. And it's never usually an issue, because I think people sort of know what they are getting into when they join the IWW.
Fantastic. So with regards to, so when we spoke before, how would it work? So if people wanted to join the IWW, is there, I guess, a specific branch, or will it be a case of having to build that branch? As in sector, sorry, not necessarily within locationally, but like as a sector.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is part of why I'm so interested about joining this. And when Charlotte spoke out about it online, it's been I guess a dream of mine, having some sort of brewery workers group or union within the IWW. We have a TEFL workers union as well that supports second language teachers as well. So in terms of getting started in your workplace, then yeah, find if there is a branch. But also, I think this is something that we often like to talk about, is that you don't even have to mention the union before you start getting organized with other workers. You'll find that there's commonality with the people that you work with. You'll find that there's issues that you all share, that you have in common, and that we can provide the support and the legal advice and the experience to help you get to where you want to be. So I think sometimes there's a bit of cautiousness and so people being a bit wary about joining a union, what that might be, some of the fears attached to it. So we can help people up to a point, but becoming a member gives you entitlement to extras, basically. And what you give to the union, you get back as well. So if you have a specific, you work in a specific area or workplace, you can bring that experience to us and share it with us.
Yeah. So with smaller breweries, again, is it more just a case of does it matter about the amount of people you have in a workforce, or is it again just like you could be like one person from this brewery and one person from another brewery, and kind of connecting that in that perspective as well?
That can happen. In my experience, there was a huge range of issues that were causing a lot of upset be careful with my language here, from contract changes, health and safety issues, disciplinaries, grievances, and we were getting increasingly more and more fed up. I think it always helps to speak to people who work in the industry, because I'm sure as an ex-brewery worker myself, like some of the language and the knowledge is shared, and you know about safety that should be adhered to when you use a forklift, or when you're lifting heavy weights, or when you're using chemicals, and that there are certain laws and protections that should be in place to do that. I think generally start small, get talking. I think you'll start to work out who is a trusted person, who you can rely on, who you can talk to. And there's kind of basics like, don't discuss union activity with your work email or using your work phone. Find a place where you can all agree on to talk outside of the workplace. And you're protecting yourself, essentially. And the more people that there are protecting each other, the easier it is to get some results. It's not always easy. I think Bryan and Charlotte can probably attest to that as well. It can be hard. The laws are very useful. They're very helpful to know what we're entitled to, but often they're not in our favor in terms of where we want to be. And I think some of that is a fear about joining a union and what that might involve. Some people see it as a protection, as you say, if you end up in a legal situation where you need a rep or you need some legal advice for where you want to be. And you would like as many people to be involved in as possible, but you're not going to get everyone in. I think that's and I think some of us may experience this as well. As much as an industry that I love and the products that are made, it does the roundabout movement of people who leave the job because they're just so fed up with it is such a shame, because you see so many good people who've worked so hard and been really pushed, fed up by the end of it. And I think that is probably a wider issue of work culture in general, but the longer you're there and the closer contacts you make, the stronger you can be.
Yeah, 100%. You've just had a win, is that correct?
Yeah, we had. We often get people contacting us about issues that I had in the workplace, and I was going to share the video that the workers sent us, but obviously to be safe, I'm just going to give an overview of what happened. But this worker was in a pub, and as I'm sure a lot of you will have experienced as well, some customers left the site. They had an unpaid bill. This worker that we were supporting was then taken to a disciplinary, and he was given a final written warning because these customers didn't pay their bill. He spoke to one of our reps. We went through all the information that we had access to, all the legal standings, what he could ask for, where management stood, where management were either lying or treating him unfairly. Whereas, for example, another worker had also not followed up a customer when they didn't pay the bill, but they didn't get a final written warning. So he felt that he was targeted in that sense. So he was given a final written warning, this worker, and through the help of his rep and our group here in London, they went to the appeal. They laid on the facts, they laid on the situation, what was happening, and he was able to have that final written warning taken off his situation. And so he then finally left the company because he realized it wasn't, a particularly pleasant place to work in. So even though they may not sound like the biggest wins, it's those things that help build solidarity with other workers as well. Because if such and such person got a win here, then maybe I can do that too. And it gives you the options to get that help, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we move on to the next section, now obviously all of the speakers have heard the other speakers speak. That was a lot of that word. Do any of you have anything else you'd like to add before we move on to more of a Q&A section? No? Class. Cool. So before I So what will happen next? Before I drop out, and Rachel will pop in to cover some of the Q&A. So, I mean, as has been discussed, hospitality is viewed as low-skilled and therefore a low-paying industry. I think it's not taken seriously in the UK, apart from most of those who are in it. It's perceived as an industry for students, meaning that there's little to no career trajectory, even though the Inside Hospitality report found that in 2019, only 27% of hospitality were students, and only 35 were in the 16 to 24 age bracket. In order to create a more sustainable industry, we need it to be taken more seriously by the government and our education system as well. It shouldn't be viewed as just a job that you can't get, that you get when you can't get another one, or something or it's something you do whilst you are at university. One of the things that we've wanted to do for a really long time at Burum Collective is attend careers and jobs fairs at universities and colleges. I think there are so many career paths within the drinks industry that a lot of people don't know about until they get their first bar jobs. So alongside our education hub, we'd like to build a careers hub as well to break down some of these job roles. I think there just isn't enough information at the moment for people to consider pursuing a career in the drinks industry. People will often fall into it and then unfortunately fall out of it due to the lack of care surrounding it. And another thing that me and myself and Rachel have talked about quite a lot is the giving the power back to the employees. So we've got there's a couple of schemes to to try and get employers to enact better practices, and unfortunately, I think there's just it puts all of the onus on the employer and the hope that they will do the things they say they're going to do, but the employee needs to know what rights they have. So one of the things we've talked about with a couple of other people before this meeting is the idea of making some like information booklets that can go out to as many hospitality and drinks workers as we possibly can, giving them as much information about the drinks industry resources that are available to them, highlighting work of people like the Drinks Trust, who I didn't know about until this year, and they do lots of really amazing work and have some really great resources available for people, as well as things like options for unions, which people don't know about. I actually did I've been writing a piece about hospitality, and for part of that I did a survey, and the amount of people who came back when the question was asked, do you have are you a member of a union, it was either no or there isn't one. So like there's clearly a communication break here, and that is something that we need to address. In order for us to be able to achieve any of the above, we will need a little bit more support. All of our work is voluntary, and if any of those things I've just talked about you think are worth pursuing, and maybe we could start doing some crowdfunding. If you can just drop in the chat if you think this is a good idea. If you're like, this just seems whack, that's also fine. But a few things we're also going to drop into some links as well. If you are an employer, please make sure that you have checked out the Everyone is Welcome initiative and things like Ask for Angela, which promote safety within drink spaces. Obviously, make sure you also check out the work of Be Inclusive, because like Lorraine's work is really, really important, and there's some amazing people involved with Be Inclusive as well. So yeah, I mean, it's clear, I think, from this that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We gathered you here today to essentially hear the intersecting issues within our industry, and I think yeah, it'll be interesting to see what we can do from here. So I'm just going to I will drop out, I think. Sorry, this is where the technical error comes in. So Rachel can jump in if that's okay with you, Rachel.
Hello. Okay. 1 second. Hi. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. That was really wonderful to sit in and listen on, and just, yeah, brilliant to hear you all, and it was very informative. So thank you. I've just been spending that sifting through the questions that people have answered. So I'm gonna read some of them out and get you guys to answer them if that's okay with you, if you're okay to give us a little bit more of your time. So if anyone does have any more questions, now is your time. So I'm going to start with a question for Lorraine first. What are the best actionable practices for employers to make space for BIPOC individuals in hospitality in terms of recruitment and retention besides fair pay / promotion?
I guess the kind of bad news is it's not something I'd be able to answer on this today, you know, and I say that because it is such a complex issue that it's not something that is a quick answer and away you go. But what I would say is that what you don't measure, you can't manage. And a starting point for any organisation should be around engagement surveys, because I think, you know, the first thing is you know, we all know we're exiting a really strange time for us all, hopefully seeing the back of COVID-19, but understanding how your employees feel about where you work is really important, and being able to analyze that data by ethnicity, by job title, will start to give you the parts of the puzzle around how the current land lies. And I say that because after June last year, the knee-jerk reaction for the large majority of businesses was to look to recruit, to bring people in that are from either Black or Asian backgrounds. And the reality is, actually, you should be looking initially at home in terms of, firstly, why the environments are not diverse, and secondly, how those people, or how all people within your organisation, but specifically ethnic minorities, feel about working within your place of work. So I always encourage that the starting point is around engagement survey and culture, because it's ultimately culture that breeds inclusivity and supports people feeling comfortable within their place of work. So that really is a starting point.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, next question. As the owner of a small brewery, I want to do the best for my staff, but many of the things being discussed, for example, HR, are just not viable financially. We have had to cut costs elsewhere due to the pandemic. It just feels unfeasible at the moment, but makes me worried that we will not be seen doing enough. Does anyone have any solutions or things to say to that? Bryan?
So I'm going to say something controversial. I don't think there's a need for HR. Not necessarily in small business. If you're talking about breweries, right? And I'm assuming that you're talking 20 to 50 staff, right? HR is helpful because in some circumstances, because there's nothing worse as a trade union official being across the table from someone who isn't CIPD trained, who doesn't know basic employment law. And this is going to come across elitist, but at the end of the day, the workers who depend on that HR manager to know the basics in terms of what they're entitled to, it's really unhelpful when HR is just an arm of operations. Do you get what I mean? Like, HR should be, if it exists at all, should be a separate independent organisation or separate independent section that has the authority to do what it wants to or feels necessary out with operations. The problem in hospitality is most large and SME businesses, if they have got a HR, it's basically part of operations, and they just do the bidding of whatever ops wants. That's not helpful. So in an ideal world, there shouldn't be a need for HR, because the management should be sitting down with workers via their union and actually listening to what the issues are and reacting or being proactive on what needs to be done. Now it shouldn't be controversial, but I just don't want any HR people out there to think that I'm wanting them out their job. In this industry, it's so problematic. And I've been across from HR who just either don't know what they're talking about, or they are actually surplus to requirements. So yeah, I think employers should speak to unions as the collective voice of workers, and that can be the buffer for understanding workers' issues.
Brilliant. No, thank you. That was very useful. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just to basically back up kind of what Bryan was saying. I think, maybe it's not so much advice, but it has, as we've seen from some of the stories that have been shared recently, and with our experience in the union, HR protects the bosses essentially, and this is where some of the differences come in. I think HR can be very difficult to approach, despite them saying the door is always open, or whatever policy they may have in place. So I think it's important to speak directly to the workers and see what they're having issues with, what they're concerned about, because there's been lots of times as well where it's, no matter how many facts or opinions or legal standings you can put in front of HR, they're pulling the company line, so it's very hard to negotiate with them at times.
Brilliant. Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to multitask and I'm not a born multitasker. So a question for Charlotte. Do you find HR processes, I realize we just discussed this, but do you find HR processes any better in medium to large size breweries compared to smaller, from your experience?
So again, this kind of goes back to exactly what Bryan and Robbie just said, in most of my dealings with HR, when there has been HR, it's been entirely driven by the owner of the company and the culture that they've put in place. And so they're either difficult to approach, or they don't actually deal with things, or they try and spin it to the way that it benefits the company the most. So instead of being human resources, they're just an arm of the state, really. And that's really not acceptable or what we want. But also, there have been instances where people will go to them if there's been, assault, etc., like that, and it can be dealt with. And especially if there is kind of a specific person who is able to be spoken to about it and support somebody through that might not happen if there's a single owner, even if they're, and as we just spoke, like 10% of people are in unions, so they're not going to go to their union rep because they don't have one. So it kind of can bridge a gap, whether or not that person should be HR or they should be in some kind of like pastoral role as a kind of like taking care of the staff. That would probably make quite a big difference. There's only been one brewery that I've worked in that's had a sort of fairly independent HR department. All the rest are either non-existent, the owner of the company, or the owner of the company's wife, which is pretty insidious. Because if you bring something up about that person, then you're just told, that's my wife you're talking about. So again, the professional and the personal getting blurred. So yeah, I'd say that across the board, it's all quite poor. Some places want to do better and are trying to do better, but other people, they're just cronies. So.
Yeah, a fantastic use of the word cronies. Okay. Speaking of so people that do want to do better, someone's asked any other small businesses, this is coming from someone who has less than 5 people as part of their business, any advice for how to start writing policies around inequality or zero tolerance? Is that something that anyone can help out with?
Yeah, I would suggest just utilising some resources that are online, to be honest. I think that, for instance, a company that I follow really closely is Runnymede Trust. They are a race equality think tank, and they're a great place to start just around education for yourself as an employer. Obviously, there's the Equality Act, and there's a number of laws in place. But I think with policies, especially around equality and discrimination, it's really around getting specific. And I tend to call them a code of conduct over policy, because what you're actually outlining to your employees is what's acceptable and what is not. But the starting point is definitely do some reading, resources on the internet. I'll drop some in the box, actually, a couple more. That can just be a really great starting point in terms of building your own education on the topic.
That's really useful. Thank you, Lorraine.
Okay.
Does anyone else want to add to that? No? Fantastic. Okay. So for the union people on the screen, someone would like to know, in discussions with workers, what reasons have workers given for maybe not wanting to become a union member? And how can we use those reasonings to maybe how I think maybe being aware of maybe people's reservations might be important in the conversations to happen over the next couple of weeks. So if either Bryan or Robbie would like to take that one, that'd be great.
Do you want to go first, Robbie?
Yeah.
I just feel like I've spoke first every time. I want you.
That's okay. I think there's a few reasons why people don't want to join unions, and I think as a rep or an organizer, you can get to a point where you realise that people aren't going to join. You just have to accept that. I think there's fear about what it means to join a union. There's a fear that you are a kind of troublemaker, or that you are going to be dangerous for the company, or that you're going to rouse up other employees. I think you also get to the stage where you're kind of so fed up with the situation where you're at work, you do want something to happen, that you do want things to change. And I think once, like I think I've said a few times now, once the courage and the stability grows between the workers, I think that makes it a little bit easier. I think sometimes it's the cost of it, what it is to join a union, that can be an issue. Some people are not really sure what unions can offer in terms of practical advice. Some people, maybe for political reasons, don't want to join a union. It can be quite broad. And I think as you get to know your workplace, as you get to speak to people from the different sections in where you work, you'll find out who you may, would be willing to join the union, who can be on that. Quite often they may not be, politically affiliated with any kind of group. They're just fed up and want something to change, and they can often be the best people to speak to about joining a union as well.
Rachel, I couldn't disagree with anything that Robbie's just said, but just to kind of talk a wee bit more, Unite, I think Unite's too expensive. I'm probably going to lose my job for saying that, right? But I think most unions charge too much money to join. But we're changing that. The workers, the members within hospitality, so we now have about 28,000 bar, restaurant, hotel and club workers within Unite. They are forming really, really strong branches in London and Glasgow and the places I was talking about. They're putting together democratic motions within their own union to change and reduce the costs of joining. We're about £14 a month if you're full-time, and about £9 a month if you're part-time. If you earn £6.30 an hour, that's far too much money. And that's what we're trying to change. There is absolutely a fear element, which, again, sorry to blame employers for, but a culture has been created within this sector where I've had workers come to me saying that they are senior managers within the organisation, the owners of the organisations that they work for, have told them it's illegal to join a union. And that's not one or two stories. That's dozens of people that are being told that, and dozens of organisations, that they can't join a union, or at best, there's no point. You know, we're not a sector that can be unionised. We have to change that culture, because unionisation is not about, or certainly to me, and I know it's not to Robbie, it's not about joining a brand of a union. It's about the collective voice of workers and demanding better for a sector. There's a reason that the starting salary of a tube driver is £56,000 a year. I'm not being disparaging to tube drivers, but it's a highly skilled job. But what was it that determined that the starting salary of a tube driver is £56,000 a year? Unions. It was because workers came together and they demanded it. So we'll continue to change the internal structures of the union. It's far too white, it's far too male, it's far too older without being ageist myself. We're changing it. And if you look at the Glasgow hospitality branch, for example, it's led by 2 young women. It's led by migrant workers. It's led by the kind of workers who are actually reflective in the sector. So there's a lot of issues with the trade union movement, if I can say it if I can say it diplomatically. There's a lot of internal issues with the unions that are being changed actually by hospitality workers, because they are it's the most diverse sector, and they're actually changing the unions as well as changing the sector.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thank you both. I guess obviously, you know, as we discussed, and as everyone who is a worker know, there is a correlation between, I guess, what is good for the worker and what is good for the employer. But we have had in the run up to this and in the chat today, a lot of employers asking in terms of if they ever need to access support as an employer. Is that something that they can do through a union as well?
Sorry, Rachel, say that last bit again. What they can do through their...
If people need support, I've had people asking if they need support as an employer as opposed to an employee. Are these the places they can go to as well, or is that going to be a difference in interest? So
again, this is controversial, because there are some sectors within Unite who do work with employers, but I don't want to. And not in a negative way, not in a, you know, if a HR director offline came to me and said, we want to implement a sexual harassment policy, can you help us write it? Obviously, I'm not going to say no to that. But when you're talking about the employer coming to you formally as the employer and saying, we're looking for a way to properly discipline this person, we wouldn't take anything to do with it. We do represent managers. You know, we represent managers at all levels, because frankly, managers can be as screwed over as anyone else. And I'm talking about the general manager of a brewery who might be on 35 grand a year if they're lucky, but they're doing 70 hours a week. So actually, it might be even bringing them below the minimum wage. So by bosses, I don't mean managers, I mean the owners. We would very rarely do any business with them other than to help write policy that helps the workers.
Yeah. Robbie, do you have anything to add to
that? Well, no, just as a part of our rules, we don't support bosses or managers, as I said, because our what we want out of the workplace and how we want to organise is at odds with each other, and there are other places for managers to get support and advice, so that's not really where we would look to. I just wanted to also back up what Bryan was said as well about like looking within the union itself and like how kind of monoculture it is as well. Like that does need to change, and it is something that's been worked on. But also, I guess to plug it a bit, we have a sliding scale of membership fees. So if you want to pay £1 a month, that's fine. Or if you want to pay £10, depending on how much you're earning, that's up to you.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. Right, let me just see if there's anything else. Sorry, bear with me, I'm a slow reader. I think Cool. No. If I'm honest, I'm also aware that you've all given a big portion of your Monday night to talk us through. So I think, unless there's any more questions, we're gonna wrap this section up. I just wanted to say a really big thank you to all of you for your time and your thoughts. It's been very, very informative. I will tap out now, just so I can get Helen back in, because I know they probably want to speak to you before we wrap this up. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, thank you, thank you. And yeah, I will tap out for 1 second, and then hopefully Helen will come back in. Okay.
Hi, thank you so much. Yes, thank you. That was really, really informative and just really helpful to, yeah, I guess start getting the answers to some of the questions that, yeah, a lot of people like have, and I'm really pleased that there's so many people here as well and are engaged and are asking questions. And yeah, and thank you so much to all the speakers. Thank you, Rachel, as well. I think, unless anyone else has anything else they'd like to add, that will be everything from us. Obviously, if any of you have any questions following up from this, or if you want us to try and point you in any directions, we're always more than happy to answer emails and link people up with, you know, different services and resources that they need. So I've just dropped our email in the chat. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody. And this is not the end. So yeah, thank you so much. Fantastic. All right, now I've got to figure out how to stop this. So that's going to be great. Amazing. Cheers.